afternoon, everyone. My name is Erica Garnett, and I'm the manager of Alumni Volunteer Programs with the Alumni Association. We are excited that you're able to join us for today's Class of 2020 webinar series entitled Got Your First Paycheck, Now What? Hosted by UMD alum Adebimpe Dada. This webinar is part of the Alumni Association's webinar series specifically crafted for Class of 2020 graduates, in which we hope to provide thought-provoking and valuable content that will help alumni like you achieve your personal and professional goals. Please keep a close eye on your UMD Alumni Association event calendar as we look to provide relevant content throughout the year. Okay, we have a lot of information to cover today, and we want you to get the most out of this webinar. Bimpe has about 30 to 40 minutes of content to share with you, and we'll reserve time at the end to answer your questions. There will be a code at the end for you to submit questions, or you can type your questions in the chat at the bottom of your screen. Now about our presenter. I'm excited to introduce UMD alum Bimpe Dada. She graduated from the University of Maryland with a degree in economics in 2000. As the VP of Centralized Credit Operations Manager with TD Bank, Bimpe owns accountability for leading the Regional Commercial Bank's Centralized Credit Operations team. The group is designed to become the bank's credit management center of excellence for centralized tasks, including streamlined annual reviews. In her free time, Bimpe enjoys spending time with friends and family, traveling, reading, and volunteering in the community. I'll pass it off to you, Bimpe, to get things started.
All right, thank you very much, Erica, and welcome everyone. I am certainly happy to be here with you. A big congratulations to all of you for, as I understand it, you are the class of 2020. So congratulations about that. I am happy to be here to talk to you today about strategies for managing your next paycheck. Right, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Erica, you can go to the next slide. So my goal before the end of this conversation would be to help you understand the importance of good money habits and how to create a budget for yourself and the importance of staying out of debt. I do see that a few people have put some answers in Menti, and I appreciate that. So I have people mentioning budgeting, how to invest, financial wealth, money saving, investing wisely, responsible finances, retirement contributions, better financial management, insurance expectations, investing and saving, managing money, responsibility, how to budget. So essentially, I'm seeing a lot about budgeting and seeing a lot about savings and seeing a lot about responsibilities. So throughout today's presentation, we'll actually talk about every one of those things. As Erica mentioned, you can certainly put in your questions in the chat box. We will plan to have a segment at the end of this for questions and answers. But if you have any questions as I'm speaking, feel free to put it in the chat box. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so objectives for today, again, money management strategies, identifying what are your fixed or variable expenses, what are your needs, what are your wants. We'll talk about creating a budget. I'll give you an illustration about how to do one. We'll talk about how you can manage spending that you do have to do, and then we'll finish up with a budget action plan. Hopefully, as we, again, go through this conversation, you'll get a chance to ask some of your questions. Before we get started, though, let's talk about, you can go to the next slide, Erica. Let's talk about sort of why some of us have challenges. So this will be, for some of you, the first job right out of college. For some of you, you may have been working all along. So this may be, again, your first paycheck for some of you. It might be helpful to have some information about how to manage that to avoid some challenges that some other people have encountered. So identifying what tends to cause these challenges for some often is our habits, our spending habits, our bad spending decisions in some cases. So there are situations where we encounter challenges, unexpected tragedy, there is a hurricane, you lose your home, there is something outside of your control that happens that causes you to have financial challenges. But a lot of times, our issues with money are because of the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis about money, right? So the way we handle our money, the way we handle our paycheck, often results in this: as soon as I get it, I've spent it, and so I don't have anything left over to be able to deal with those emergency situations when they do occur. So again, this is that paycheck to paycheck cycle. I get paid this week, I spend the money this week, next week comes, anything that I need to buy, I have a paycheck to cover it as well. If I can get out of this cycle because I have made some arrangements and some plans, then I can get away from this trap of constantly sort of chasing my tail when it comes to my paycheck. Quick question. Does anyone have a strategy that they use today for how they handle their money and how they handle their expenses? And I believe you can answer that in the chat box. So one of the things that I'm going to talk through today would be, what do I need to do, or how can I deal with my paycheck and avoid this challenge? One of the things you should keep in mind is your paycheck includes certain things that come out of it prior to you even getting it, right? So there are taxes, there are other things that you may have to be responsible for. But understanding that what comes to you at the end of the day, what am I able to do with it, right? What do I need to pay bills? Do I need to pay my debt? Do I need to save for a vacation? One of the recommendations is, when you think about your budget, when you think about your pocket, what you've got available to you, consider your needs versus your wants, right? So when you identify your needs, the way that I define needs, and the way most people define needs, is if I do not have this thing, I will be unable to survive. So a need is something that you require for survival, such as food, clothing, shelter. Sometimes we would add transportation into that need, because I may need transportation to get to my job. But then when we talk about food, am I talking about groceries, or am I talking about luxurious dining? So then sometimes your need could also become a want, right, if you don't classify it accordingly. So we do have to think about, if I have money, if I have to exist, I need to have food, I need to have a place to live, and I need to have something to cover myself with. Of course, I can get basic clothing. I don't need designer clothing, which often costs more money. So we'll talk about a little bit of that later on as well. But when you think about your needs versus your wants, one of the recommendations is to think about your paycheck. 50% of it should go towards your needs. So 50% would cover your rent or mortgage. 50% will cover your groceries or food that you need to, if you're on a food plan. 50% should be allocated to all of that. If you need some clothes, then based on the season, you may need to get additional things. 50% of that should cover your needs. And then your wants, oftentimes people say 30% should go towards your wants. I would say 30% or less or more, depending on your specific situation. And then the remaining 20% is towards your future, towards your savings, towards your investments, towards your retirement. As you get older, you may begin to think about towards your children's education, whatever that situation is. But again, 50% appears reasonable for your needs. The remaining 50% you can reallocate as necessary towards your wants, towards your debt reduction, towards your savings, towards your future. Erica, you can go to the next slide. But again, thinking about your needs and wants, it's primary. So when you start thinking about your needs, when you've identified what your needs are, right, the next thing you want to think is, how do I manage the money that I have, right? So let's talk about having a plan. So you've heard it before. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? So if you don't have a plan for your money, you cannot tell it where to go. You want to be able to tell your money where to go. You want your money to work for you. You want to be able to make sure that you're aware of where your money is going. And having a plan, meaning having a budget when it comes to your money, helps you make your paycheck work for you. So again, we've talked about 50%. So you already identified the things that you must have in order to exist. And therefore, you've allocated for those things from your paycheck. And then the other things, you can also identify that. Now, you can have a budget for different situations. You can have, if you're thinking of taking a trip, you can come up with a budget for travel. If you're trying to pay down your student loans, you can come up with a budget for that based on what's extra from what you need in order to live, right? And then another thing you want to think about is, what are my long-term versus my short-term? So most of the time, your short-term goal is making sure you're taking care of what's present, what's here today. Think about what are your long-term goals. So some of us want to, again, I think I mentioned earlier, or Erica mentioned earlier, that I like to travel. So one of the things that would be on my goal will be places to go. And sometimes those things cost quite a bit of money. So you got to put money aside in order to make that happen for you based on whatever timeline you have for yourself. Some people may have a plan to go back to grad school. So what does that mean? If I need to go back to grad school, how much would I need to provide for that on my own? How do I put that aside, right? So some people want to have a nice life in retirement. What do I need to put aside for that? One of the things that's also very important for us to do when we think about how we manage our money is having an emergency fund. So what's an emergency fund? Fund that you don't have access to, a fund that you don't have everyday access to, let's say, fund that you can get to in the event that you have an emergency. So an emergency is not, oh, that jacket looks awesome, I really need to get it, but it's really outside of my budget for this week, but oh, well, I have that money over there that I might be able to get, right? Get to. We don't want that kind of emergency fund. You want an emergency fund that is really emergency. I'm not going to use it unless I have a crisis that I can't have, that I don't have any other way to resolve. Okay. Now, another thing you want to think about when you think about emergency funds, or the recommendation for this is having 3 to 6 months of your paycheck saved for an emergency. Obviously, that doesn't happen right away for most people. What's generally recommended, and I don't know if you've heard about Dave Ramsey, he has Financial Peace University, and he mentioned like some 7, I think he talks about 7 baby steps. One of the baby steps is setting an immediate emergency fund, if you're able, of $1,000 and keeping that aside for a while. And then over time, build up the 3 to 6 months of monthly expenses. That way, in the event that you lose a job, you cannot work, COVID happens, as we have experienced, a lot of people lost their jobs during this time. So if you have had a little bit of a bucket that's saved for you, you may be able to survive for a period of time until you're able to either get another job, or your health improves, or you have other situations that are fixed for you, right? So that's another thing to think about, is having an emergency fund. Again, make sure that that fund is not something you can easily access. Either it's a savings account that doesn't have a card that you can use to access it, or something that you don't go to every day, right? So it can be an online account that you will have to do some extra work to actually get to. That's one of the things that I use, an online account that I have no checks, no debit card, nothing. And it's just there. It's automatically transferred every month into that account. And in the event of an emergency, a true emergency, I would have to make some extra steps in order to access that money. It's not something that I can easily access because I saw that really, really, really nice pair of shoes that I wanted to have. So think about the way that you set up that emergency fund. Make sure that it's not easily accessible by you. Another thing to think about when you're thinking about your money and how you manage it is your future. So I mentioned retirement before, and I'll use a personal illustration here. So as Erica mentioned, I graduated in December 2000, right? And I started working almost immediately, but I didn't know, I was not aware that there was value to this employer matched contribution. I didn't know that for 6 years post-work time, maybe even more than 6 years, because it just was never something that I was told about, so, something that I was taught about. And so what I discovered years later is a lot of companies will offer you an employer match. So if you contribute up to, let's say, 4% for several companies, they will match 4% of that, and that money gets saved in your 401k. For most employers. Now, if your company if you get a job with a company that offers a 401k match, I strongly encourage you to participate. 401k is a retirement plan that you can actually take with you. It's yours. If you leave that company, you can roll it over into another company. You can roll it over into an IRA if possible. So there's specific situations. Again, if you have specific questions about financial instruments, you may need to speak with a financial planner, a tax accountant, or any of those things. But generally, one of the things that I wish I'd known when I left college was get that match, and it's just building up for you over time. So keep that in mind as well as you step into your next opportunities, if you step into your next job. If you have an employer that is offering you an employer contribution, an employer match to your contribution, I encourage you to take that. Okay. Now, before we go into our next segment, I think there's a question in the chat box, and it says, I'm familiar with the 50-20-30 rule, but I'm fortunate enough to have majority of my needs covered by my parents for the time being. So I want to allocate more money to my savings for the down payment for a house, but I can't figure out the percentage ratio. So this is entirely up to you. I think your name is Kellen. This is entirely up to you how you choose to allocate that. If you are in a great or perfect position to increase. So for instance, you don't have to spend 50% on your needs or wants. Therefore, your 30% savings could actually increase to 50%, right? So to 80%, or you add that 50 to the 30 and you put it there. That's another thing that Dave Ramsey talks about, and I hope that you can all still hear me, but that's another thing that Dave Ramsey talks about when he talks about it. He has an approach called the debt snowball approach. So if you've got debt, and some of you will have student loan debt that you're living this period of your life with, right? So when you have debt, he suggests a snowball strategy. So what that means is you look at all the debt that you have, from small to large. And as you finish paying off the smallest one, which most of the time when we do this, we feel so good, you roll up, instead of taking that extra money that you got from the smaller one that you will now not have to spend on that loan, you roll up that amount into the next one. And then, so if, let's say I was paying $250 on this small one and I was allocating 10 to the others. Once I'm done with the $250 and then this loan is paid off here, I'll take that $250 and add it to this one. So now I'm $260 on this one. And then when this one is done, I'm going to take that $260 and add it to this one. And then I'm $270 on this one until you pay off everything. So instead of considering this money that you're no longer paying on that loan as extra money, you load it onto the other one until you're paid off. So in your case, Karen, I would say you would want to consider adding that money that would have gone towards your needs, because that's covered by your family. You can now allocate a bunch of that, a portion of that, to savings and setting it aside for your house down payment. Now, when it comes to down payments, it depends on how you're looking to pay for it. 20% of the value of your house is usually typical for a down payment. So consider what kind of house you're looking for, where you're going to be, and then consider how much you would need to save for that particular event. Okay, Erica, we can go to the next slide. So how many of us today are tracking our spending? And if you could put the poll, answer the poll question, or do we currently track our spending today? All right, so good. A few of us are currently tracking our spending, so that's very good. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about the importance of tracking your spending. I'm going to give you some tools that might be helpful for you to do that. Now, typically, I would actually do an actual walkthrough of the Excel file that's shown on your screen, but I'm not going to be able to do that in this session. So I'm going to have Erica share the file with you, and you can play with it on your own. But one of the things I want to point out is that's very important is if you don't track your money, as we mentioned earlier, you're not going to know where your money is going, and it's likely not going to go to the things that you need it to go to. So a lot of times if I have $100 in my pocket, if I didn't have a plan for that $100, I could spend it on anything. If I had a plan for it, I might rethink the situation before I actually spend it. So one of the suggestions here is carry a notebook with you. Of course, most of you probably have smartphones, so you're probably going to be using your smartphone for that. But just make sure you're keeping a record of your spending during the course of the day, and then when you get back home, you can update your Excel spreadsheet. Now, a lot of people use Excel spreadsheets. Most of you may be more interested in applications that allow you to do it electronically. There are tons of applications for that. If you have a bank account, most of your banks also have applications that allow you to actually tie your budgeting into your banking record, so that makes it easier for you. However, there's an application that I have used in the past. I don't currently use it. It's called Mint, and it, again, allows you to connect all of your accounts if you have them, and it allows you to budget. Another application that I've used in the past, I still use, is Personal Capital, and that application is a bit complex because it allows you to bring in a bunch of different kinds of accounts, your loan accounts, your checking banking accounts. It allows you to bring in your investment accounts if you have them. And they also have an investment portion, which if you put in a certain amount, they will reach out to you and start trying to help you manage your money better. But again, for your purposes, I think it might be helpful to start with the Excel spreadsheet and then get yourself accustomed to the intricacies of what needs to go into the budget. And over time, you can expand beyond that if you choose to. So on your budget, on the screen, what we're looking at is what are the things that are critical that we must have. We've talked about needs before, right? So we talked about food, clothing, shelter, transportation. On here, you would identify, and recommendation is to really categorize those things that are critical for you. So rent or mortgage, I need a place to stay. I'm either renting and paying mortgage, or if I'm lucky, I'm living with my parents and I don't have to pay for that, right? But if I do, then how much do I need to pay, and when do I need to pay that, right? So if is it coming out in week 1, week 2, week 3, am I getting paid every week? Am I getting paid every 2 weeks? You know, so before that, you want to identify what's my budget, what do I even have, right? So if I've identified what I have in the form of my budget, when I put the amounts in each of these weeks as applicable, it's going to automatically calculate for me in the file that Erica will share with all of you. And then when I see everything, I can make an assessment as to, okay, do I really need to pay that makeup artist every weekend? Or do I really need to go to the gym, or can I just run around my neighborhood, right? Depending on what I see on here, it might help me make adjustments. And that's one of the things that we really want to use this tool for. So it's not just writing down my expenses, it's actually truly tracking them and seeing where is my money going, and is it really working for me where it's going? So for instance, if I have a category for food, right, broad category is food, and I noticed that in that category, I have some groceries, but then I have a lot of dining out, and it adds up to more than 80% of my food budget, then I have to think about my situation and say, do I need to make some adjustments here? So I know that food is a need, but do I really need to go to all of these restaurants every day of the week? And then, those are the places where you can move things around. So when you've done all of this tool is really helpful for you to determine where I'm doing things right and where I need to make some changes if necessary. So let me ask another question and before we go into the next slide. So sometimes I may do all of this and then I realize that my expenses for that period exceeds my budget, exceeds my income. What can I do? All right, so Erica, let's go to the next slide and talk about what are the things we can do in that situation. So I've mentioned before, looking at your information, possibly eliminating expenses, right? So do I really need that makeup artist? And maybe I do. Maybe my job requires it. So maybe if my job requires it, then I can talk about, is there a new source of income for me to have this? Which means, do I need to negotiate with them to say, well, if my job requires this, should you be giving me additional compensation or an additional stipend for this, right? Now, if my job doesn't require it and I'm just spending money on it, then I probably need to adjust my spending. I probably need to eliminate it if it's an unnecessary expense. So those are things that, this is why it's good to use a budget tracker to kind of look at where exactly is my money going and is it necessary for it to go there? If I have extra, so after I've done the budget, if I have extra, I can take that and go and add it to my savings plan. I can take that and go and add it to my alternative budget. So if I wanted to, again, travel is an illustration that I use regularly because it's something that I like to do, but you might have something else that you like to do, and that may be what you choose to reallocate that money to. Or it could be that, you have student loan debt and you have to get that done, but if I have extra at the end of this month, let me apply this extra to the student loans. Sometimes people would apply that extra to their mortgage if they had a mortgage and they wanted to get it paid down sooner. Now, a lot of times when you choose to apply extra to a loan, you should call the loan company to let them know that you want to apply that extra to the principal and not just an extra payment, because a lot of times the extra payment, when applied to principal and or interest, principal and sometimes it would be applied to only interest, it doesn't really help you. It doesn't speed up your amortization. So consider calling the company and letting them know that the extra you're paying should be applied fully to principal. That reduces your principal payments, and it also increases or accelerates your payoff timeline. So keep that in mind as well. But one of the things I want you to leave this part of the conversation with is being very, very clear on what your needs are versus what your wants are, right? So if you know for sure that these are the things that I must have in order for me to exist or subsist, then I need to be able to reallocate things as necessary to make that happen for me, okay? All right, let's go to the next slide. So this is your homework. I've mentioned a couple of times already that Erica is going to share some things with you. One of those things is an Excel file. Your homework, and I'm sure you don't want to do homework, but it's probably going to be helpful for you over time, is to take that Excel file and sort of work with it and look at, okay, I've received this job offer. This is what I'm expecting to receive from them. Based on what I know, these are my expenses. I'm going to document all of that on this tool. And then based on what your income is, and based on what your expenses are, if you've saved, great. If you've overspent, you need to revisit that situation and try to understand why. You may, again, as I mentioned earlier, you may need to consider a second job. You may need to consider an alternative job, right? So, or you may need to consider increased compensation. So you might have to have conversations about, if this is required for my job, I need to have it every month. is there a stipend for this? Is there a compensation that supports this? Or if that doesn't exist and those things continue or need to continue to happen, then do I need to find an alternative employment? Of course, in this environment, that's probably not as realistic for a lot of people quickly finding something else. But something to think about is if I'm not able to cover what I need to cover, do I need to make some changes? Okay. So again, one of the final things about budgeting, one of the final things about managing your money in general is you have to review your budget regularly. You cannot just do it once and leave it. It's a constant thing. You have to keep going back to it, and you have to keep making sure that it's still working for you. And if necessary, you're making changes. All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, so I put this here because I know that some people have had questions about this, and not your group specifically, but another group I was talking to. So I thought it might be helpful to have this here for you as well, to talk about credit and talk about credit scores and the things that are important for you to know. Primarily, be responsible with credit cards and with credit in general. And what does credit mean, right? Basically, it's your financial resume, right? So when you go for a job interview, tell them a little bit about yourself on your resume. When you go and apply for a loan, when you try to buy a house, buy a car, any of these things, your credit report is your financial resume. It's telling people he or she is a good credit risk or not, right? And what are the things that contribute to this score? Your payment history. And where does the payment history come from? It comes from your credit cards. It comes from your rent. If you're renting, some rental companies report to the credit bureaus. So if you're late on your rent, that is a negative ding on you. Think about the amount you owe versus how much you have available. So if you've got a $5,000 credit limit and you're at $4,500, that reflects negatively as well. So the payment history, amounts owed, those account for 60% of your score, which means that you want to make sure that you're paying on time. If you have any challenges and cannot pay on time, strongly encourage you to call the provider and let them know. A lot of times they can work with people and not report immediately or give you a little extension or something like that. But most times if you're consistently late, it will be reported to the credit bureau, and that's reported every 30 days. And again, you want to, as much as possible, pay on time. If you are not able, preference would be to pay the full balance if you can. If you're not able to pay the full balance, at least pay the minimum by the due date. Make sure that you're not at or near your limits. Make sure that generally 10% or less of your available limit is considered good, and that reflects favorably on your credit score. Also, how long you've had credit. So how long have you had a credit card? How long have you had a car note? How long have you been responsible for paying on cards? Now, if you're starting out for the first time, generally it just takes a while to build up these things. And the way you build it up, again, is paying on time, making sure you're not maxing out your cards. Consider the kinds of loans that you have, right? So if you've got a mortgage versus if you've got a credit card, the types of loans, the types of credits you have also have an effect, right? So some are considered less risky. So a mortgage will be considered less risky in the event that you don't pay the mortgage, they can collect the house and they can sell the house. If you don't pay the credit card, it's not as much. Now the weight is lower, as you can see, it's 10%, but those also have a part to play. Another thing is, don't apply for credit too frequently. So when you apply for credit, it actually reduces your score by a bit. So if you're doing that like every month, that's certainly going to have a negative impact on your credit. So keep that in mind as well. But make sure that if they're sending you anything, any information, the credit card companies, that you're checking them, making sure that you're aware of what's being requested of you. But my recommendation is, if you're going to get a credit card, make sure that it's a credit card that has an interest rate that is reasonable. If you're going to use the credit card, I recommend that you have the funds available to pay it off as soon as possible. And if not, make sure that you have a plan. So what I tend to do, or used to do, would be if I was going to buy something that's a big ticket item and I want to use my credit card to buy that thing because I want to get the benefit of the credit card, right? Because you get some scores, you get some points, you get all this stuff. So what I would do is, and if I know that I didn't want to pay all of it at once, I would say it's $1,000. I would budget $250 a month to pay it off over the course of 4 months and really have a plan for that versus just buy the $1,000 and say, oh, I'll pay the minimum and then I end up paying $2,000 for something that was worth $1,000. So if you're going to use a credit, have a plan for how you're going to repay it. Ideally, you want to have the money on hand to pay it right away. But if you don't have a plan for how it's going to be paid off, you can use the debt snowball approach that I mentioned earlier. Okay, we can go to the next slide, Erica. All right, so there's some resources that I also want to leave with you. I did mention Dave Ramsey Financial Peace University. That's a book. It's a whole program if you're interested in exploring that. TD Bank also has some information on their website, tdbank.com, financial education. There are different topics there. You can explore all you want and get as much information as you need to get, depending on what the topic is. There's credit, there's banking, there's investment, there are different things. And there are even some simulation tools on the website as well. Free credit report is something that I wanted to share with all of you because you may not be aware, but in 2003, I believe, there was a change that allowed us as users, as individuals, to get access to our credit reports at least once a year. So you go to annualcreditreport.com. Now, there are so many companies that will tell you that they will give you a free credit report and then there's some little fee at the end of it. This is the one that's provided through the FACTA, that's a Fair Credit Transactions Act, but this is a requirement that the credit bureaus are supposed to provide to us as users in this nation, in the U.S. So you can access this and get whatever information is on your credit report. If you check the credit report and there's information that you don't agree with that is incorrect, you can also dispute its rights from there. Okay. So just want to make sure that I leave that information with you. And I believe that's the end of this part of the presentation. Again, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box and we'll talk through them. Or you can also use Mentimeter, whichever one works. But we'll talk through some of your questions now.
Yeah, thank you, Bimpe. This was so great. Like you mentioned, now we have time for some questions. So I think that Bimpe shared a code to use if you'd like to use that. You're also welcome to put some questions in the chat. I've seen a couple come through, so I can start with those. But Bimpe, I wanted to give you a chance to look at the Menti.com site and see if there are any questions that you want to start with there.
Yeah, there are no questions there yet, so I can start with yours.
Sure. So one question that came through was, would you recommend that I start investing now? And if so, do you have any suggestions of where to start?
Good question. So I should preface this with, I am not an investment advisor, so I will share with you my personal experience. If you are able, then it is wise to do so. Now, what do I do when it comes to investments? I'm risk averse. So I'm not a person who is daily monitoring a stock portfolio. I'm not a person who is doing this kind of transactions daily. But what I do is I look at a company, I look at the history of that company, I look at the stability of that company, and I think if I want, and I also look at the management of that company, the leadership of that company. So for instance, I personally, again, personal judgment, I have not invested in Walmart ever, and I have no desire to, because historically, they haven't aligned with the way that I would prefer employees to be treated, right? So I have not invested in that particular company. Now, if you have the funds and you want to invest, there are different tools that you can use, even if it's just a little bit here and there, right? So one of the tools that I use is called Robinhood. It's a digital application. You can find it on your phone. They usually have a lot of different listings. You can get stocks, you can get ETFs, you can get cryptocurrency if you're interested in that kind of stuff. But what I like about Robinhood is that it also has information about each of these companies that you can do some reading on and see if it's something that aligns with your own personal values or not, you know, and then you can choose to invest in them. Another company is SoFi, Social Finance, and they also have an application and a web program. SoFi is also a lot more. I feel like it has a lot more because it also has loans, and you can refinance your student loans through them. There's a lot more going on with SoFi than I've experienced with Robinhood. But both of them, if you're thinking of you know, kind of dipping your feet into investing, both of them are probably good tools to explore. Now, with some, you know, if you wanted to invest and you didn't have a whole lot, both of them, I believe, are now offering fractional shares. So if I didn't have all the money to buy several shares of Google, I can buy a portion of Google and say I put $50 in, they'll give me however much percentage of a share of Google that is, right? So again, these are two tools that I've used that you might find useful, you might find helpful. But my recommendation when it comes to investing is you have to consider what's important to you. And I think about things, I put it there and let it stay. I think about growth. My strategy is growth, and rather than income. So some people have a strategy of, I want this to turn over and provide me some income right away. I'm just thinking of future growth. Something that has been stable for a while. Leadership is good. Leadership has been historically strong, and they're going to be. And this company has innovative products that are probably going to continue to exist for a while. So those are the kinds of companies that I would consider. But again, you have tools that are available to you. Those two that I've suggested, I've used personally, but there may be others that others are aware of and might be interested in sharing as well.
Great. So another question I've seen is, do you have suggestions for what to select when signing up for insurance with my company, i.e. health, dental, or life insurance?
So, okay. So when it comes to insurance, it has to be personal. What do you need, right? So what do you need? Are you in relatively good health? Or do you need access to health more frequently than somebody who is in relatively good health? And if that's the case, then the way that you think about your insurance would be different. So for instance, one of the things that, again, I wish I'd known sooner, but I've learned over time is there's something called a high deductible health plan, right? This high deductible health plan is a pre-tax plan, which means I make a contribution to this plan from my paycheck pre-tax, and it reduces my taxable income. Now, if I don't have to go to the doctor frequently, then this plan works for me because I don't have to pay. So when the high deductible plan, what it means is, in order for the insurance company to start paying on your behalf or paying fully on your behalf, you have to meet this high deductible first, right? So if you go to the doctor frequently, you probably don't want the high deductible plan. You want a plan that allows the insurance company to almost immediately start paying on your behalf, right? So then in that case, your premium will be higher. Whereas the high deductible plan would generally have a lower premium, but you have to meet a deductible in order to access the funds. The other advantage of a high deductible plan that, again, I personally have experienced, it may not be your situation, is that I can take the money that I'm putting aside and I can invest it if I wanted to. So if I know, for instance, I'm going to have a big surgery this year, then I can put that money, I can make sure that that money is available to support that. But if I know that I'm planning that surgery in 3 years, then I can invest it for now and make sure that it's growing by the time I need it. So your standard health plans, your HMO, PPO, those typically don't have this high deductible option, which is a health savings account option. So most of your high deductible plans will have a health savings account option, which allows you to save. A health savings account is different from an FSA, which is a flexible spending account. Almost all insurance plans have a flexible spending account, which allows you to just use your card to access your insurance, I guess, funds that are available for you towards you paying for your copay, paying for your doctor visits and all that. The HSA allows you to actually save and invest whatever money you're setting aside during that period. So again, it would depend on your particular situation, how you choose to approach that, but this is what I've done.
So thank you for sharing that.
Okay.
Another question that's come in is, should I put my emergency fund in a savings account, or is it a good idea to put it into an investment account?
So you have to think about what an emergency could be and what kind of investment account it is. So not all investment accounts can be easily accessed, right? Not all of them are extremely liquid, which means I may need to wait 24 hours. I may need to wait 3 days to get the money out. So it depends on what kind of investment account or investment instrument you're talking about. Now, savings accounts typically don't offer significant interest. So if you are thinking of putting your money, my emergency fund is put into a money market account, which offers a little bit more than a typical savings account, but savings accounts typically offer like 0.2%, if that, and then you have to actually put a whole lot more into it to get 0.5%, whereas you might get some mutual funds, money market mutual fund accounts that offer significantly more than that, depending again on how much you put into it. So to answer your question, it would depend on what kind of investment instrument you're referring to. If it's one that you can easily access, then sure, but consider that savings accounts are quite stable, whereas investment accounts may fluctuate in value. And so if it were to fluctuate in value and you needed to access it and that declined, then you may have some more challenges there. So consider, how can I easily access the funds if I needed it in the case of an emergency, and what's the likelihood of fluctuation? Can I lose my money? Now, when you think about investing in stocks and mutual funds and things like that, you can lose your investment, right? Whereas if you're thinking about a savings or checking or money market account, those accounts are generally secured and stable, and they're guaranteed up to $250,000 by the FDIC. So, think about that and try to figure out what makes sense in your own situation.
So the final question.
Okay, does that help? Yep.
Okay, yeah. So the final question that I've seen come through, and we may have time for another question if anyone has it. But this question, or this person said, I've never had a credit card, but want to build good credit. Do you recommend opening a credit line now? And if so, does the credit limit amount matter?
No, I don't think the credit limit, the no is not that you shouldn't open a card. The no is I don't think the credit limit matters. So the credit limit doesn't matter. When you open a credit card account, most likely when you open it for the first time, you'll probably end up with a pretty high interest rate. And then as you demonstrate your ability to handle the credit properly, the credit card company will generally adjust your balance, your limit, and then also potentially adjust your rate. I know that I got my first credit card at the University of Maryland, and I believe it was one of those tables that were set up at STAM, and I got it there. And I had that credit card for over 20 years. I didn't need it anymore, and so I ended up canceling it, but I had it for over 20 years, and those kinds of things kind of help build your credit as well. So if you get the credit card and you pay it off on time, you use it well, it will add up and it will build your credit history. But it doesn't matter how much it is when it starts. I believe that first credit card had a $2,500 credit limit on it, and over time they would offer you an increase. They constantly would offer you an increase as you use it responsibly.
Awesome. Well, Bimbe, it looks like we've answered or covered all the questions that have come through. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
I do not have anything else to share. It has been my pleasure to be here with all of you, and I hope that you find this, what we've discussed so far, helpful. And I hope that you find financial success in your next steps. All the best.
Awesome. Well, I think I echo probably everyone's sentiments on this webinar. Just want to say thank you so much for providing such great information. And just so everyone knows, I will be sending out a recording of this webinar along with some additional resources from Bimpe soon, so be on the lookout for that. And then in addition to this Class of 2020 webinar series, I also encourage you to check out the Alumni Association's Democracy 2020 virtual event series. This series aims to provide resources and information on things to know before the election this November. I will add that link into the follow-up message to everyone so that you can see what is all listed. And again, thank you, Bimpe. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Hope everyone has a wonderful day. Stay healthy and go Terps.